technology.
By the 1970s, the railroads experienced a decline in relevance and proved incapable of keeping pace with the newer and faster highway systems that were spreading across the country. Today, railroad systems continue to facilitate the movement of both freight and passengers, but on a considerably smaller scale. A significant portion of the railway infrastructure that once spanned the area has been dismantled and converted into recreational bike trails. The once thriving rail yard in Chillicothe, previously a center of intense activity, began dismantling in the 1980s and is now largely non-existent. The sole surviving structure of the former rail yard is located right on Watt Street. Yaktangi Park preserves an old railroad trestle.
There was an old company out here that north of town. Carter, it used to be the Carter Company, and had a signal system out there. And they had brought in all kind of people to protect the president, and they would be on top of those signals, the signal bridges that we used to have out there. And I thought, well, maybe I can go out there and meet the president once in my lifetime. So yeah, so I went out there, and sure enough, when he came along, got off, did his speech and everything. And so he was going down the fence line shaking hands. So I thought, I was back here, standing back here watching, I thought, I need to shake his hand somehow or other. So as he was going down the fence line, I was following him down the fence line behind each person because I couldn't find a way to get in there. So I went clear to the end till he got clear to the end, and when I walked up there, got to shake Mr. President Clinton's hand. And that's one of the highlights of my railroad stories that I got to see.
But in its day, the railroad employed over 1,200 people. Down on Watt Street, they had a boneyard down there, and they had blacksmiths, they had welders, they had anything you could think of to repair the cars. So I mean, during that time, it was really a going place, and everybody seemed to live down there because the way the caller worked at that time that called the trains, if you lived within a mile, he had to walk and knock on your door and get you up and say you're called for this train and come back to the depot. So it was easier for everybody to live down in that area of town, and that's where that end of the town grew. And the west end grew later, of course, but then a lot of people that worked on the railroad lived down in that area, which I thought was kind of interesting that they lived close to the work because he had to come and get them. So I don't even know if they had, some of them didn't even worry about a phone, they just had an address for him to walk to. Yeah, but that's been a long time. That was back in the early 50s or late 40s even. My dad was a caller, so I've heard them stories.
Yeah, one time there was something exciting went on, yeah. I was going to Athens, I was running an engine. I was going to Athens in the middle of summer, about this time of the year, when you have a lot of heat. And they got this new ribbon rail down where everything's a quarter-mile long when they put it down. Then they'll weld that together, and it might be 2 or 3 miles long without a break in it. So when you get all this heat, they make expansion joints. I don't know how to explain it. To go like this so they can move a little bit, you know, from the heat. But I was coming in Athens one day, and I thought, oh no, and I could see where in a curve the rail had expanded and shoved the rail out sideways. And just so happens we had to go through there 20 mile an hour, and just as I was getting ready to kick my brakes off the train, usually kicked them off about 5 mile an hour ahead of time, and by the time the brakes release, you're down to your speed limit, you know. But I just so happens I seen that up there, and I just left the brakes on. And I got down to, I didn't stop. I didn't get stopped in time, but I was down to about 10 mile an hour when I went through it. And if I'd hit a 20, it could have derailed, and it was right in the middle of town, so it could have been bad.
People will say, well, why don't you see cabooses out on the road anymore? here's what happened with cabooses. They're expensive to build. I think the average price of a caboose by the 60s or 70s was somewhere in the ballpark of about $80,000 to build a caboose. They were expensive to build, expensive to maintain. They needed a lot of maintenance because they were shaking up and down those tracks and getting a lot of stress put on them all the time, every single day. So they were expensive to maintain. They had to have a crew in the cabooses. You had a couple of brakemen, you had the conductor, you had to pay those people. What happened is they decided with modern day technology that they didn't need to have people. They didn't really need to have cabooses. What they did, computerization, is you now have sensors in the tracks. And as a train rolls past, there are sensors in the wheels and the tracks. You have sensors that can read the heat temperature of the bearings as a train rolls by. And it picks up all that information. And it does that through the use of, if you've ever seen a train rolling down a track without a caboose, typically you'll see a flashing light on the back of the last car that's on the train. And that flashing light, there are several different names for it. It's a flashing rear end device is the formal name, but they have several different acronyms for it. My favorite is FRED, flashing rear end device. A lot of the railroaders call it a FRED. And FRED will pick up all the information that live people used to have to read, watch, look out for, and communicate. Okay, and Fred will pick up all that information and it will send it to the engineer, and the engineer has a computer in his cab that a lot of the railroaders like to call Wilma. Now you remember the old Flintstone cartoons, right? You had Fred and Wilma. So you have Fred that picks up all the information that live people used to do, and it transmits it to the engineer through his computer that they call a Wilma. And the engineer now monitors. You only have usually a couple people, the engineer, and usually one or two other people there to switch cars and, handle things like that.
And my job as an engineer out of Chillicothe was, you hired in as a fireman, and there was always 5 men on the crew at that time. Engineer and a fireman and the head brakeman, and then you had a conductor and flagman on the rear. So we had 5 people, which had diminished down to 3, and then 2, and then even they have run trains with 1 now, but that's, the FRA got into it about safety, and they didn't think that was safe enough, so they've done some things to counteract that. And the way trains are now as compared to the way they were in 1970 when I hired in was, you might have a mile-long train, but you had people on there to take care of any trouble we had if we had to stop. They'd start from the rear and come forward, and the head brakeman would go back and meet them on the ground, see what was wrong, whether it might have been a busted air hose or whatever, what went wrong. But anymore, we don't have cabooses on the rear of the trains anymore. We just have a rear train device, keeps the air pressure up for the engineer to operate the train. And sometimes I don't know if a lot of people know how a train operates. They operate on air pressure. You charge the brake pipe to 90 pounds, and all the cars are charged to 90 pounds. So when you do that, the brakes are released, but then when you want to slow down, you take air out of the brake pipe, and that applies the piston to the brake shoes to the wheel and slows it down. So that's how and a lot of people don't know how the locomotive actually runs either. It's a diesel engine, yes. 12-cylinder, 16-cylinder, 20-cylinder, and it's the diesel engine just operates a main generator or a traction alternator, because underneath the engine itself are traction motors, electric motors. So we make the current with the diesel engine that turns the main generator or traction alternator. A newer type is a traction alternator as opposed to the main generator at that time. So then that turns the wheels. So a lot of people don't know that you got 3,000, 4,000 horsepower, some 5,000 horsepower now on these diesel engines.